Good evening. I'm Carol Randolph. Tonight I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator as we explore a very important topic, the Black male achievement gap. Black male students are twice as likely as white male students to be held back in elementary school, 3 times as likely to be suspended from school, and half as likely to graduate from college. Now, to guide us through this discussion, we have assembled experts, individuals whose resumes are both impressive and lengthy. Therefore, in the interest of time, I will introduce them citing their present title, but you will learn more about their achievements during the program. On our panel is Dr. John Jackson, President and CEO of the Schott Foundation. Dr. Jackson, I have some startling statistics here. Your foundation finds that only 10% of black males are proficient in 8th grade reading, and only 52% of black males will graduate from high school in a 4-year period. What's going on?
Well, it's not necessarily just our statistics. It's national data, NAEP data, that indicates that. One of the things that we recognize is that all students should have a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. And what we do at the foundation is try to identify the supports necessary to provide that opportunity to learn, and then challenge systems, districts, states to put in place the policies necessary to ensure a pipeline for every student to have an opportunity to learn.
Well, I'm going to come back to that, but I also now want to introduce Dr. Ivory Tolson. You are Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And you've done extensive research and commented on several documentaries on black male achievements. Yet you challenge some of the negative statistics that come up, like the one we just heard. How should we interpret that?
Well, I began to challenge a lot of statistics after I wrote my Breaking Barriers report. And my Breaking Barriers report was all about solutions. So it was about what schools need to do, what families need to do, what communities need to do to make sure that black males had the best shot at doing well. And what I was bumping up against were people whose cynicism about the problem was so deep that they would not accept my findings. And so when I traced the root of that cynicism, when I started to just really dig into it, why do you think the problem is impossible? Why do you not believe in black males anymore? It had to do with a lot of numbers that had just been circulated and recited. What I call zombie statistics, statistics that come out looking one way, but they get repeated so often that they contort and they become something completely different. And so what I've tried to do is help people to understand the nuance in all of this. Like you mentioned, NAEP. Before I use NAEP to classify...
NAEP stands for?
National Assessment of Educational Progress. The ones that are showing that only about 10% of black males are proficient in reading. If I really want to understand that, I'll go to the website and I'll look at the sample questions. And I read the sample questions, and when I read the sample question that they're giving 4th graders, I know that I would not have been proficient on the NAEP test.
All right, we're going to hold that point, because
okay.
we're going to come back to that. I want to introduce, too, Tony Upson. You are the Director of Leadership Development at the Capstone Institute, and you're a former teacher with more than 40 years of experience. So what role or what blame, if any, should we place on public education?
Gosh.
We don't have enough time.
It's kind of hard to say, but we've known of the issues with American education, dating back to 1983, the publication of A Nation at Risk that said American schools are failing. But I'm pleased to share with you that the work we're doing at Capstone Institute right here at Howard University focuses on creating the opportunity to learn, helping schools and the leaders of schools to build their capacity, stressing the importance of culturally relevant instruction, meaningful learning, engagement. If students aren't engaged, they aren't learning. What does it mean for a student to be engaged? How to help teachers in their development in terms of developing lessons to ensure that students learn at a high level.
All right, Ken Amos, let me go to you. You're the founder and CEO of Community Academy, Public Charter Schools, and you are a vocal advocate for charter schools. Are they better than public schools? What can they do that the public schools cannot do?
Well, maybe I'm going to dispel one of those myths, too.
All right.
I'm not sure how much of a vocal advocate I am for charter schools. What I am is one who believes that all children can learn, And this myth that black boys can't learn is also just that, a myth. And I think there are a multiplicity of things that affect the capacity for one to reach their full achievement levels. And we don't address them. We don't address them politically. We have not addressed them from the highest levels of our political offices. And we're certainly not doing it in our schools.
What do you mean
of
we haven't
any
addressed
kind of
them
schools.
politically? President Obama should be doing what?
Making all schools a national school system. Take that one back home. The reason why I say that, if you look at the large successful systems around the world, which is what we ought to be doing, how do we take a system as large as ours, numbers of students, and effectively give every single child an opportunity to learn at the highest levels? Seems to me there is an example of that in the nation of Finland, one of the top 5 school systems in the world. X number of years ago, when I was beginning to be an old man, they recognized that they had that same problem there. They nationalized the system, used all the capacity and resources, engaged the families and communities, recognized the role of family and community in the child's development, and built the best schooling system in the world.
But that's
today.
not a diversified community, Finland. We have a whole lot of different
That's
issues.
also a myth.
All right.
That's
Why is that?
also, they may be smaller than us, but the diversity of Finland is not much different than the diversity of America, because they also have a huge influx of Africans, if you will, coming from not only the Middle Eastern African, but sub-Saharan Africans. They also have the influence of West Eastern Europeans coming in. And if you don't understand, culture is cultural. Cultural differences create cultural changes in any society. So that's what happened. You have a whole host of different kinds of ethnic, religious colors, if you will, in Finland. Same magnitude? No. But by the same token, there are more children on the honor roll in China than there are children in American schools. So which number you want to play with?
Well, now, gentlemen, we've been talking about these issues. I've been doing this type of program, this type of discussion for several years. And I just don't, are we better off right now? Have we made any kind of difference, any kind of achievements that we haven't done years past? Where are we on this issue?
I think when you cite that graduation rate, 52%, and the Schott Foundation, we have been tracking this for over a decade, we have seen some progress. And this is the first year where our data indicates that it's over 50%. But the gap is still the same.
Where is, when we say gap, what do we mean?
The gap, in this instance, the gap between the graduation rates for black males compared to white males. And so we've seen the numbers for black males increase, but the gap has consistently remained the same. So much so that if we were going to close the gap at this rate, it would take another 50 years.
And that's scary.
It very much so.
And we're not, yes, go ahead. You don't have to ask my
Let me give you a
permission. Go right
perspective
ahead.
From a local school principal, there is a gap starting in kindergarten. There's what they call the school readiness gap in terms of students not having vocabulary to begin kindergarten lessons. And there's data that they probably know better than I that says when students come and begin school with this gap, which may be 2 grade levels behind, that it's almost impossible to catch up. You spend the rest of that child's schooling trying to catch up, trying to eliminate that gap.
Well, all right, gentlemen, sorry, Kent, go right ahead.
But Carol, Ms. Randolph, we're chasing the wrong objective, I believe. We continue to chase test scores. When you talk about how do you measure achievement gaps, invariably there's a single high-stakes test involved in that equation, whether it's a graduation issue or a promotional issue. Generally speaking, you have a high-stakes test somewhere in that equation. So we're chasing the ability for our children to pass a high-stakes test. That also suggests, the good doctor just said, he could not have passed a test. And this man's a doctor. I don't know whether
Yes, he
the
has a
Harvard,
doctor.
I know he's a doctor too.
And
I don't
a
know if the
lawyer.
Harvard doctor could pass it or not. But again, if you look, again, right now, there's a man at this room, in this table, who people wrote off, put out of school, because he didn't pass certain tests.
Now, who? You?
Me. I
Right.
failed out of American University because I didn't pass the test that was set up for me. I went to an HBCU, Delaware State, at MEAC School, and they nurtured me, accepted the failures in the man, and created whatever I am today.
Well, now, wait, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I want to underscore that because, you know, when we talk about the achievement gap, you really have to ask the right questions.
Which is?
You know, who set up the matrix? How valid is it? You know, so if you're telling me that if my son scores this, where is the data to support that his life outcomes are this other than the gates that you are setting up for him? Now, the NAEP assessment, I talked about that. When I was in 4th grade, I was put in a slow reading group. And when I look at the items on the NAEP test, it's not a mystery to me why a lot of our young black males aren't succeeding on that test. Because a lot of them were just like I was. They were holistic in their understanding. They were immediate in their purpose because they grew up a certain way. They grew up in a home that wasn't necessarily future-oriented, but it was immediate-oriented. So we want to know where that next meal is coming from. We want to know what that next check is going to do. And so there's a lot of good characteristics that come out of that, like the ability to hustle, resiliency, the ability to think creatively, the ability to problem solve. But if I'm reading a test and all you want to know is my rote memorization of this long passage about bees, which is the sample item that I looked at on the NAEP test, this is long passages about bees, all right? So if I'm answering questions about that, as I'm reading the text, I'm not just thinking about the bees that they're representing on that page, I'm thinking about the bees at my grandmother's house in North Louisiana, or the fact that black people are like bees sometimes because we're stuck in these hives. So I'm thinking all of these, you know, holistic, synergistic things. And so if I get down to the items, I'm not going to respond to that exactly the way that you put it there. Now in life, that characteristic has served me well. It's allowed me the opportunity to be creative in everything I do. The ability to manage multiple jobs, to be a Washington bureaucrat one day and be a creative professor another day.
Well, now, look, that speaks to who teaches the student that you just described.
Who accepts them?
All right, who accepts them? Because a lot of the teachers now are taught a particular way. They may also be overworked, stressed out, not a lot of other things, and they may have 25 to 30 students in their class. How do you help that teacher, be male or female, help you?
Yeah, well, we have to get the policies in order. If the teacher's life and livelihood depends on the type of test that I described, I have a lot of sympathy for them. And I think that that's the root of why a lot of teachers are more impatient right now. They're more likely to put kids out. They're more likely to medicate the kids because they're not really given the type of latitude they need to be patient with the type of kid that needs their patience. So we got to get the policies in order.
Tony?
In addition to that, they're more likely to leave the profession. They believe that the emphasis that's placed on these annual tests, you know, whether it's the DC-CAS or the MCAS, that it limits them in terms of their creativity and their ability to really teach the curriculum. You know, that there's the given curriculum, there's the taught curriculum, and then the learned curriculum.
Well,
and they often don't.
Let me put Ken on the spot here because I've gone in his school. The first thing I noticed about it is it's really clean and it's quiet. And when the students line up, he gives them a message. What is it? You give them that word is excellent.
What's the word?
It's excellent?
Excellent.
He goes through that, but I also noticed in the classroom there is a teacher and then there's an aide. And that's not always in a lot of the places here. First of all, the principals may not be involved, and they also are judged now about how well their teachers are doing in the test scores. So haven't we created an environment, frankly, that's bound to fail out a lot of young black men and women, too?
Bingo. Remember, you asked the question earlier. I said that the policy questions are out of whack. You're pointing out, again, Dr. Tolson just pointed out all the policy areas. Again, we can't expect this administration to change a lot of things overnight. But the reality of it is this country is still not focusing on the things that are being described here. And as long as we don't focus on that, we can't narrow this gap issue. We keep focusing on academic solutions to a non-academic problem.
When they say educators are not being brought into the policy-making decision, I hear that from teachers. They'll say administrators are making this. Are they?
Well, administrators understand what's going on in the classroom. You can't get by into that one either. But still, it's bigger than a given classroom, a given school, even a given school district. This is a much larger issue that we're facing. And the transformation of a system that was constructed on, again, we go back, this basic system that we're operating on goes all the way back to the 1700s. It hasn't changed. We're talking about boxes, which are schools, with little boxes in them, which are classrooms, that have class schedules that are, again, go back to the agrarian age. Fundamentally, that's what we are, and that has not changed.
So we're doing the same thing. Gentlemen, I'm going to take a little break in here now and ask you to turn your attention to the monitors as we present an excerpt from the film American Promise, which is scheduled to air on WHUT February the 19th and the 20th. Now, the filmmakers are middle-class African-American parents who chronicle the path of their oldest son and his best friend from kindergarten through high school, beginning at a prestigious private school, when the parents and students face many unique challenges. Let's take a quick look.
Idris,
Yeah?
tell me about your girlfriend.
I don't have a girlfriend. You're just shy. I'm not shy.
Idris is extremely bright.
Shayon's creativity is exceptional.
What we teach in Dalton is to teach them they have a voice.
It's my best school and I love it there. I would like to be a professional basketball player when I grow up.
I want Shayon to be comfortable around white folks because I think even at this point, I am not comfortable around white folks.
How do you feel about being one of the few black kids there? Is that ever an issue?
No, it's never an issue. Good try, Idris.
Dalton will open doors for him for the rest of his life.
This school enticed us by saying they were going to make the school rigorous and look like the city of New York.
By the time middle school hit, we were left with our son and the other boy, Oluwaseun, and that's also when the particularities of the experiences and impact that implicit racism has on African American boys started to hit home. And we took this leap of faith as filmmakers to keep the camera rolling. And we realized as we were documenting with the camera that what we thought we were avoiding by going into an environment that we felt was going to be nurturing, we were actually, deep in the belly of the beast of the racial achievement gap.
I'm not going really good in school. I get really frustrated. My basketball team, they said, oh, you talk like a white boy.
They told us that our son is a hard-to-manage guy. They don't know him.
There's a cultural disconnect between independent schools and African-American boys, and the question is why?
I hate school. It's bad, it's hard.
The problem is focusing in class.
After you leave Dalton, where do you go?
I really don't want to leave.
I don't think it was, frankly, a good match for him.
I'd be better off if I was white. Isn't that true?
This is unacceptable. Sit up.
It's laziness.
Something is wrong with my child.
People would say, wow, you're controlling his entire life. Well, I think we weren't controlling enough.
So it appears the achievement gap can affect black males regardless of class and/or opportunity. What did you think about that? Not only did they put him in a prestigious school, but they put him in one that I dare say had very few black students, male or female, in there. And yet he still was not achieving, or self-esteem got caught up in that one. It's what I got from that.
Well, I think we are different generations here. And whether the older side of this thing or the younger side, we happen to be sitting that way, I guess. But it's still set up that black men are still viewed by the broader society, and all the systems send those signals that we're less than. Take, for example, you mentioned charter schools. 16 years we've been at this. When we started, there's probably eight men, black men, running charter schools in the city. We're down to 2. We're down to 2, Donald Hens and me.
But what happened to the rest
They
of them?
put them all out of business. They closed the last one down, other than myself and
Well,
Donald.
now, should
this
some
week.
of them be put out of business, in all fairness?
No.
None of them.
I don't believe you should close schools, because first of all, you should improve schools. Your business ought to be about the business of including schools. They closed a school called Options, where they said the kids were off the hook and the adults were worse. Well, they had, what is one of the issues? Do black children go to school? This high school had, coming to it, a couple of hundred kids every day. Then start there. If they're coming to school and your goal is to get them to school, then get them to stay in school and get them to move forward. But yet you close it down, and there's absolutely no statistical data that because they close a school and they go to another school that's run by somebody that don't look like us, that they are better off. They have no data to support that. Do you? No.
Well, now, okay. Let me take a question out of the audience if you stand up a minute. While she's doing this, let me ask you, though. Tony, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to come back to a point that Dr. Jackson raised yesterday. As I looked at this film, I'm wondering, he pointed out the importance of creating an opportunity to learn. All children bring with them what we can call assets. And teachers should take those assets and build them into the lesson. Black males in a white environment, has a set of experiences that are different than his peers. He has prior knowledge that may be different, traditions with his family and his community that need to be brought into the lesson so that it can be culturally relevant and meaningful for him.
Now,
often that's ignored and left out of it, which causes the kind of lack of interest and motivation to what's happening in the classroom.
So you're saying the parents should have been leading the charge in some sense in that school?
In identifying or assessing whether or not those factors are being taken into the planning of the lessons for their child.
All right.
Yeah, I had a question. I think it's really useful that you happen to mention the Finland contribution to educational solutions. So with that, my question came to be, where are the blueprints? You mentioned a couple of good points that I just really want to expound on. I feel like I was on the same page as you, as a matter of fact. When it comes to blueprints for success, I think we have them culturally, and I think we have them academically. But a conversation I remember having with some educators amongst myself was that we know that the Finland system has a really great blueprint. We know what that is. So the question is, why aren't we following that? What type of political or influencers are there to explain why we have a perfect example, but we're choosing for some reason not to implement that so we can have the same type of results? And also you mentioned that we're trying to solve things academically, but really I think, perhaps, do we think that there's a cultural missing piece to this blueprint as well? I think that perhaps we have a culture of a lot of successful black men, if you will, or people in general that have been successful. How willing are we to share that blueprint with our forthcoming generations so that they'll at least have something to work with?
Okay, let's
so
get
that they'll know what success looks like.
So what we talk a lot about when we talk about the achievement gap is actually an opportunity gap. The achievement gap is just the byproduct of an existing opportunity gap, which is a much larger issue that has to do with access to health, access to livable wages and all the rest. And you're right, Finland did their turnaround. It didn't take them 100 years or 50 years in a relatively small period of time. Singapore also, Shanghai. These are places. And I traveled and went to those places with a group of other funders. And we talked to them about what they did, how they turned things around. Finally, I think they just got fed up with us, and we asked, what did you do? They said, well, we came to the U.S., we looked at your research, and we went back and implemented it.
Looked at our research.
Right. So we don't have an innovations challenge. We have an executions challenge. And what makes us unique that we have to accept is something that we haven't talked about, the impact of race in America on these issues. Because even as you look at the U.S. Scores as it relates to the international test, PISA, if you pull out the scores of those who are low income and those who are impoverished communities, the U.S. score would be on par with a number of other countries. What makes us different is the level of disparity, racial disparity, and socioeconomic disparity that we have in our system.
All right, let me give you a hypothesis. Suppose you have a pot of money, a specific pot of money, and you will not get any more of this money, but it's quite a bit. Where do you spend it?
Well, a significant portion for me would go into early childhood education, because we know that's where we get the highest return on investment. But I wouldn't leave out those that we've already lost. For those that we've already lost, we need to ensure that they have the wraparound supports, not just the academic supports, but the academic, the social-emotional, and the health supports to pull them back into that pipeline, which provides them opportunity.
But isn't the fact that we're talking money, and there is a particular pot of money that is the problem. We just kind of spread it around and therefore don't do a good job on any of those age groups.
Yeah, it's a money problem, but it's a policy problem. When you think about how we spend our money, a large portion of the money is spent in programs. Programs are progress, but policies are power. So we're not going to program ourselves out of this challenge. You know, there are not enough programs, enough program dollars. If you can understand the distinction between the power of policy and program, if you ever look at the data on the incarceration rates, if you look at a period through the 70s, it was a constant incarceration rate, regardless of race or what have you. Somewhere in the 80s, there was a 45-degree spike, particularly in the incarceration rate of black males and Latino males. One would think that there was some type of summit where black and Latino males got together and said, we're going to commit more crimes, we're going to get caught, and we're going to jail. Break, let's do it. That's not what happened. The Reagan administration changed the policy on nonviolent drug offenses, caused a 45-degree spike. Clinton and others doubled down on that policy, which kept that spike going. So it's really the policies. Until we institutionalize early child education for all and other pieces, I don't know if we're going to program in fact, I do know we're not going to program our way out of this.
Yes. I just wanted to know if, why do you all think that the black male dropout rate is so high like now?
What is the black male dropout rate? Do you know it?
Not on point, but I know it's very high, though.
Are you a student at Blue?
Yes, I'm a student.
Did you drop out of high school?
Yes.
Why did you drop out?
I dropped out because of I was attending Blue Senior High School at the time, and I dropped out because of I just felt as though I didn't need to go. I mean, because of I felt as though it wasn't even a reason, because I wasn't even learning as much as I thought I was supposed to be learning, you know, just being in the classroom, sitting around doing nothing. Like you said earlier, it was about 20 or 30 students in the classroom, and that's how Blue was. And like 20 or 30 students in the classroom, and the teacher is not being engaged with us all. Like I'm just sitting there doing nothing, you know. I just try to find something better to do with my time instead of being in school all day.
And what did you do? Can I ask?
I got into trouble, you know. I got into trouble, things that I know.
Well, we won't tell all that. But why did you go to the Luke Moore School? What brought you to that school?
Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about going back. I mean, it took my mother, you know, to just really put the pressure on me. And, you know,
good for her.
She's like, man, you got to do something. You're not going to be in here every day. You're not going to just be outside. Like, you just coming in at night, and, you know, you got to go do something. So, I mean, I was planning on going to Job Corps, but I was going to Job Corps on my own time. Mm-hmm. And so she introduced me to the school, Luke Seymour, and she said it's an alternative, like a second chance. And I started off just doing it for her and my little brothers and sisters and everybody, you know, just to try to make them happy. But, you know, I just went ahead and just enrolled, and after a while, I'm loving it.
Comments?
So, and thanks for sharing your story. Very, very inspiring. A couple of reasons why there's dropout among black males. One has a lot to do with suspensions. And so it's not necessarily dropout, but push out. So we have young black males who are being suspended for what I would consider pretty trivial things like chewing gum, cell phone use, dress code violations, coming to school late, truancy. Now, truancy is serious, but I can't really wrap my mind around I'm going to make you truant because you're truant. So, and the variance across schools is pervasive. Another reason is that when we look at 9th grade retention, so I just looked at DC data very recently. Kids are the least likely to be retained in the 8th grade and the most likely to be retained in the 9th grade.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
So the 8th grade retentions, failing the 8th grade is almost unheard of in DC for some reason. Then they get to the 9th grade.
So they just pass
and then all of a sudden, there's about 600 kids in DC who've been retained in. So what it appears is that something is happening in their transition to the 9th grade where we're losing them, and we have to explore that. Now, I also need to say, because I do a column called Show Me the Numbers, so people really have to understand what the accurate numbers are in order to really deal with the problems effectively. There's a common notion that more than 50% of black males are dropping out.
And that's not true.
That's not true. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 11% of black males drop out. Don't think that number is good. That's bad. That's 1 in 10. And it's twice the rate of white males. But if your image of black males is 1 in 2, half of us dropped out, half of us didn't, then you're not working on the problems that you need to work on. Because the narrative, and you can see the comments in all of the articles that come out, the narrative is black males are going to jail, black males are far out there, all of this kind of stuff. Who we're really losing is that young black male who doesn't have parents who are college educated, they don't really know about going to college, they don't know what classes they should be taking. They're at the school, they're afraid of the gang members. They don't want to go in the gang, but we're treating all of them as though they're at risk.
All right, let me just ask an assistant principal of the Luke C. Moore School. I'm picking on you, stand up, stand up. What are you doing to keep young men that come to your school involved, engaged?
One of the things we do a mentoring program. It's called our AP Top 10. It's for our males who either show academic excellence or academic improvement. It's about 10 a quarter, so by the end of the year we have 40 of those students. Some of the boys are represented here. We meet once a week. They have my phone number. We do some things outside of school. We feel like it's important that they have somebody that if they ever needed to talk to them, that they have a direct line.
Okay, now let me give you an example. I'm coming into school, I'm a young black male, and I'm totally out of control. I don't want to be there. I've been thrown out of several other high schools. First day I cross the threshold, you do what?
I say good morning, welcome to Luke C. Moore. It's a new school, a new experience, and a second opportunity for you. And most of our kids take us up on that. Most of the kids, they really, at the end of the day, they just want to be loved. And you think
that sounds so simple to me now.
It's really about they want to feel like you want me here. You really want me here. And a couple of our students, I do home visits, and they're so shocked when they see my face, and the next day they're back at school because you cared enough to come see what was wrong with me. You cared enough to come to my house and make sure that I was okay.
So how do you get your teachers to have that, or do they have the same view? Do you train them? I mean, are they different from what this young man has experienced?
So I am the assistant principal. My principal does a wonderful job of explaining that mission and that vision, and we hire folks who believe in that mission and vision. And hopefully by the end of the year, if they don't support the vision,
they're gone.
Well, we try to find other folks who support the vision.
Which is, Tony, go ahead.
I'd like to come back to your point. You had this pot of money, and Dr. Jackson said that he would invest or spend it in early childhood, and that's a good way to spend it. But the single most important person in any school who can determine the success or failure of a student is that classroom teacher. A significant amount of money needs to be placed on teacher development. We're now looking at our system in this way, you know, from the Secretary of Ed, Arnie Duncan. They're talking about teacher quality, but the issue is teaching quality. How well that teacher can plan the lessons, develop her lessons, inspire students, keep them motivated, welcome them into a class, creating the opportunity to learn, believing in them. You know, look at 3 characteristics of a teacher. The first is what that teacher knows. He or she has to be steeped in their content knowledge. Second is what they can do, whether they can manage a class, develop lessons well, you know, all of those things related to classroom instruction. But that third one is critical, what they believe. They must believe in their students, believe that their students can achieve. Because if they do truly believe in them, when they don't, they won't look at the child and think that there's something wrong. They'll look within. It must be something that I'm not doing right.
All right, another hypothetical. Okay, I'm a 20 or 30-year teacher. I've done well, students like me, but I get a new group that's coming in that's totally out of control. They're 9th graders. And for whatever reason, they're coming in, and all of a sudden, everything that I'm trying to do has not worked with these particular bunch. So I'm thinking seriously of leaving the profession. What would you do to help that teacher?
I would create what I would call a professional learning community in their school. There is a teacher, someone who knows how to deal with students who have a change in behavior and attitude than she's experienced with. Provide an opportunity for them to meet, network, share lessons, observe each other, talk about the challenges that she had. Put a support system in there for that teacher, because if she's been there that long, then she obviously can teach. But a different set of students bring in a different set of challenges, a different set of perspectives. There must be a process of improvement, ongoing improvement going on in that school, not only for the students, but for the teachers.
Let me share a story with you. I had an opportunity to go to Taiwan many years ago. And I went into a classroom. I asked to go into the classroom. And when I was asking about their teachers and so forth, and they were saying, well, the teachers live in these apartments, they pointed out. I said, how much do these apartments cost? She said, oh, $1 million. I said, how does a teacher pay for something like this? And they said, teachers are our most important people in our society. They train our most important students, the future. So if we don't take care of them, our future is not the same. We don't have that attitude here in the United States. Well, how do we get,
But again, that's back to this policy question again. I really think that Dr. Jackson kind of set the real issue before us. You know, policies are really where we're falling down, not in program. We know what to do. We know how to do it. The problem is we don't have the will to, in fact, do it. What gets in the way of that will, something we haven't mentioned, one thing we mentioned was race, which is a part of it. The other thing is money. And I'm not talking about whether we have enough money to run our system. We have enough money to do that. The question is who we pay what. And I'm not suggesting we're going to pay all of our teachers big dollars. But as Mr. Upson knows, Tony knows, well, as you know, we're planning to build right now a 60,000 square foot school building, but 104 apartment units sitting on top of them. Why? To give the teachers a place to live in the high rent district of the city. But nobody in the city wants to support us on that.
Well, it'll be another one of our fights.
Right.
Hold on, you have a question or comment?
Both. Good evening, everyone. My first comment is that I think the problem with the achievement gap is that there's a large disconnection with the teachers and the students themselves. I noticed that when I was coming up, the teachers were a tad older, but the connection with the students from the teacher gave you some sense of familiarity, whether it be she reminds me of an aunt or an older cousin, or I'm just comfortable with talking to her. The disconnection with the teachers now are those of, I'm not sure of the characteristics of all the 20 to 25 to 30 kids I have in my classroom, or the personalities that I have to deal with, and not knowing that the backgrounds of these students come from wide and different cultures. I mean, there's so many kids that have their own personal issues that the teachers are not, I don't want to say focused, but they're not adjusted. They're not able to adjust with their personal issues along with trying to bring across that curriculum.
Well, when you have a student who comes and perhaps cusses you out, what do you do about that? And you know you can't touch that student. You can't put your hands on that student. What do you do?
Well, 9 times out of 10, that student is bothered by something other than the teacher.
Okay.
So it's usually another issue that's plaguing that student at that moment that that gives that volcano eruption. So when that student gives you those words in your face and so demeaning, you need to find out why. Okay. And there's so many teachers that don't want to find out why. They want to erase that fact and get rid of that student.
All right. While we're talking about all these students who aren't achieving, there are many success stories that are never heard, and let's take a look at one young man from a housing project in Dallas, Texas, who survived against all odds.
In the projects, we lived next door. It was infested with rats. It was drug dealers. You would see literally a police car flying through right in front of your door chasing somebody. Where I stayed where there were Bloods, and just down the street there were Crips. So, you know, not having my mother present as much because she was constantly at work all the time made it very hard for me to actually discern what was I supposed to really do. And I felt like the only way that I could actually become somebody in terms of West Dallas was to be the hardcore dude, because education clearly wasn't what everybody was doing. The teachers began to actually start to see something in me. And what I realized is that the teachers would always say, Joseph, you're a great student. You're a great student. You can go places if you really believe in yourself. The band leader, Mr. Hill, he became my father for many reasons. As I was going through high school, I remember times when I wanted to give up. Losing my sister to the mass incarceration system. I remember going to Mr. Hill and saying, man, I don't think I can make it. He took the time to instill in me leadership qualities that he told me that will transform me for the rest of my life.
Now, Joseph Dillard is with us in studio. He not only graduated last year with honors, he is currently in his first year of law school. Let's give him a big round of applause. What do you think? Yeah. Okay. What made the difference?
I believe what made the difference for me, as most of the panel has already said, I believe one of the most critical moments in my life came my 3rd grade year when I was hearing all the comics. There was a teacher by the name of Bobby East. She's deceased now. But she pulled me out of the classroom and said, I think you can make it out of this school system. And I think that changed my perspective because, one, I was in a talented and gifted part of the school, but also they had me in a classroom where they called me, basically said I was mentally retarded because I didn't articulate.
Wait a minute. You were in a talented and gifted, but also called mentally retarded because you didn't speak out in class.
I didn't speak well and I couldn't articulate my vocabulary, so they deemed me as retarded. So you have to deal with the oxymoron with yourself.
Right.
On one aspect, I'm great in your classroom. I'm excelling on your exams. I'm passing all the tests with flying colors. But yet you're still separating me, taking me to another room, and almost dumbing down my education.
So how did you get out of that?
Eventually.
Or did you stay in it?
I stayed in it all the way through high school, all the way through, I believe, elementary. Mm-hmm. And when I went to my middle school, it just stopped. So it's as though they really didn't care. So they had already placed in my mind. And literally, it kind of affects you all the way through. You see the success story, but even when I got to Howard, I was still afraid to speak vocally in a classroom. Eventually, it built up because of professors coming and saying, Joseph, speak up. This is your time. So I think the missing factors is that a lot of times, I think in the whole education conversation is that, one, we don't talk enough about those people or teachers or people in the community. It don't even have to be the teacher. It's people around in the community. If it had not been for certain males in my role, I didn't have a male role model. I'm the first male in my family to graduate from high school. All the other males in my family I watched go through the mass incarceration system. My sister was incarcerated. Right now I have a younger brother whom I'm trying to save because he's going down the same road. Same thing, teachers putting him out of school. He's a great young man, but the teachers can't take the time. They have him on medication, and he's just a kid with a lot of energy.
We talked about that at the break, and about kids who just couldn't sit still, who were young black men. I told you about in my early reading class, the kids were reading, but they were on the floor and they were wiggling around, but they heard everything that was going on. What about that?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of in-service trainings with teachers. Any teachers in here, by the way? Okay. Thank you. All right. So I do a lot of in-service trainings with teachers, and one thing I notice is that they have a hard time sitting still the entire day, too. So, a lot of times, close to the end, they need to take some breaks. They need to stretch. I've had some teachers that will have to stand up in the back, to pay attention well. So when we think about the fact that we are really restraining these kids in ways that not even us can do, if the average person in this room was placed in a situation where you just could not move, a lot of times we don't concentrate well that way. So it's really about us not really understanding normal developmental processes and normal human urges and asking them to be in a box that's really unfair to them.
Color within the line, as my mother would say. Yeah, let me take this young man. I'll get you, John.
I just have one question for the panel. I've just been paying attention a lot to a lot of the nonprofits, the education reform nonprofits, nationally and even locally. And a lot of them have been actually having either fellowships or programs where they create policymakers. They're putting, they're taking these folks who are doing a fellowship program and then putting them back into their community and actually making sure that they're being a part of that policy conversation. Do you all know about any nonprofits that are doing that for African Americans? And I ask that because while I do feel like the Teach for Americas and a lot of the other nonprofits out here do a great job, I just don't think there's enough policymakers who look like us. And I think that's really one of the biggest problems we have in the conversation about race or equity in education and things of that nature.
Well, John, that especially goes up to what you were doing. What about that? Enough of us making policy?
Well, not nearly enough of us making policy. I know that the Congressional Black Caucus has a fellowship. Young Elected Officials Network has a fellowship program. Even the Ford Foundation, a fellowship program that we should be plugging into. Because on one hand, we applaud Brother Dylan and we clap. But on the other hand, we should be crying. He said in 2014, I'm the only black male in my family to graduate from high school. 2014. We heard the brother talk about the great mentoring program that he has. He's able to impact 10 this year, overall 40. But we know there are thousands of brothers that need that type of mentoring. So if we know that mentoring actually helps, why is it still a program? Because if you go to the communities where it works, you don't see a lot of programs. So why is it that all young men don't have access to a mentor? Not a volunteer mentor, one that's paid out of the coffers of a state or local budget. And I know people say, well, we're going through a recession, how do we do that? But we pay for probationary officers out of these budgets. So again, it takes us back to this point that Brother raised, what do we want to pay for? What do we want to pay for? And he said, all the brothers need is love.
Well, given the political climate that we have now, how realistic is it that what you're talking about can be achieved?
The black community is not impoverished. The black community is not without intellectual capital. The black community is not something that can't, in fact, fix it itself if we choose to. This whole conversation suggests that somebody else has got to fix this for us.
Well, if you agree, go ahead. Yeah, all right.
And I reject that. I flat out reject that. I don't need no policymaker telling me how to raise my children. Now, I have no biological children. Yeah, Tony, I'm about to do what I'm about to do. And you know I got a bunch of kids, right?
I know, right.
Right. I got more kids that my wife and I took in our house. We took into our house 85 teenagers over an 11-year period, sent 73 kids to college, 60 of them have graduated from college. Yes, 5 of them were murdered. So I'm the father of 5 children who have been murdered. But I never stopped, and I ain't asked anybody for any policy changes. People came to my door from the city administration, said, Mr. Amos, we have a problem. What's the problem? The problem is you're running an unlicensed home. I said, I got a license. He said, what do you mean you got a license? I went in my pocket and I took out my license. I got a license. He said, that's not what I'm talking about. Well, what are you talking about? Well, you have to have certain requirements to run a home. These are my children. When did I have to have a license to be a father? When did I have to have somebody tell me that I have the political and social, I have the political and legal, I can do this for these kids? Tell me, did somebody tell you I'm abusing these children? No. What are they telling you? Well, you sent a bunch of kids to college. And that's a crime? I feed them every day. Do I ask anybody to pay for them? No. I pay for them.
I've seen you in the grocery store.
But I will say one thing. In that respect, you're Michael Jordan. You're doing an outstanding job, and you have done. But it's still 8,500 short. And any system that depends on, your winning depends on having several Michael Jordans is not going to happen.
Right.
So you need a system, and policies develop the system to ensure that whether you have Michael Jordan or not, or whether you have a San Antonio Spurs team, that you can win not just with one great player, but the system will allow you to win year after year after year.
Okay, I have a question out here in the audience. Go right ahead.
Yes, I see right now that the conversation is somewhat shifting toward education as a social justice issue. So I was just curious if you could elaborate, the national statistics say about 70% of students, Black or Latino males, come into contact with the justice system through schools, and that school-to-prison pipeline is kind of expanded much time over the years. So how do we've talking about policy development, how do we actually repeal some of these policies that have really sent African-American men to the prison system, therefore just continuing to widen this achievement gap that's been a part of this conversation?
Well, let's bring it down to suspension.
I can talk about it from the federal level. And working with President Obama's administration, I know some of the things that he's doing in that regard. We don't have a national education system, so it's hard for the president to lay down a national policy that's going to influence everything. But we see a lot of rogue actors out there. And one of the things that, and you should look up some more information about this, but one of the things that the U.S. Department of Justice has done under President Obama is they've sued some of the actors that are handcuffing our kids in school. Now, they're going after the most egregious actors, like you can look at Meridian, Mississippi, where they were handcuffing elementary school kids over things that wouldn't even be against the law outside of school. But we know that this is going on a more pervasive level. Another thing that they've done is they recently...
I'm going to have to kind of break him to here because we're running out of time, and I want to get everybody's final. So I can't believe it. I mean, there were so many questions and comments that people wanted to make, but time is against us on that. So let me start with you, John, if you will. Some final thoughts, about 30 seconds of final thoughts for me, please.
Well, I think, number one, it goes back to the point that Brother Amos talked about, the point of extending and caring for every child, showing them love. Our challenge is, and of a colleague, Gail Christopher, who says it correctly, racism is nothing but institutionalized lovelessness. So the point becomes, how do we institutionalize through our policies the type of love that you show, the type of love that you show through your mentoring program. And I think if we can begin to do that, then we can place all students on a path to have an opportunity to learn.
It's not rocket science. You know, we've talked about a lot of complex issues, but young black males need basic love, attention, high expectations, a proper diet, good health habits. You know, it's all basic type stuff. And so we shouldn't be distracted by a lot of these designer programs that come out, because if you put a mentoring program on a school where the kids aren't eating properly at home, they're going to curse out the mentors and we're going to blame the students. Right. So we have to take care of basic needs and understand it's not complicated, that we all have the capacity to make a difference.
Tony?
Back in the 70s, there was a noted psychologist by the name of Dr. Ron Edmonds who created the effective schools correlates, you know, characteristics of effective schools. And he said then, and it probably sticks with a lot of educators, we already know all we need to know to educate all children at a very high level. What we now need is the will.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kent?
He said implementation. He says will. We have the capacity. And the reason why we continue to do what we do is continue to understand bigger and better systems. But I still maintain we need to look inwardly at our capacities. And I think there's a lot more capacity than we give ourselves credit for. And if we exercise that capacity and use our historic models, we can make a difference in many more children than we are today. We can't save them all, but we can save a lot more than we're saving now. I understand my God's training for me. He sent me to corporate America to learn how to deal with these folks. You know what I'm talking about. He sent me to Vietnam to deal with the casualties we got to deal with in this business. And lastly, he sent me to his son to appreciate the role model for which I should follow.
On that
Amen
note.
to that.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists, our studio audience, and especially those of you joining us at home for this important topic of conversation. Now, please check the WHUT.org website for additional information on this, as well as any other program in our Vocal Point series. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Vocal Point, here on WHUT.